I've been processing trauma for the past 3 years using the technique outlined in this book. And it has taken me from being completely emotionally unaware and numb to less emotionally numb and unaware. Along the journey, I've realized that most of us misunderstand trauma and the magnitude of effects it has on us. So, here are my top 13 lessons from these years. The first 8 are realizations, and the next 5 are the literal life changing benefits I've experienced. There are two types of trauma. Recently, I was purchasing this trauma guide by Dr. K, and I was talking to Papa about it. And he asked me, "What trauma have you suffered?" To which I awkwardly brushed away the conversation and just told him it would still be helpful for me. He was operating from the common notion that trauma occurs in incidences like war, abuse, sexual assault, or neglect, etc. This type of trauma is sometimes referred to as capital T trauma. I'm grateful and consider myself to be lucky that I've never suffered from a capital T trauma, but there is another kind of trauma that does not get enough attention, which is small t trauma. As young humans, we have these non negotiable psychological needs from our parents or caregivers. These are a deep sense of contact and connection to parents, attachment security, which means that we don't have to earn the right to be who we are, permission to feel all the emotions, the experience of free play in order to mature. Let me ask you this. Did you ever feel that your parents were not available for you, either mentally, emotionally, or even physically? Or did you ever feel that you had to do certain things in a certain way to be loved by them? Were you ever asked not to cry because you're a man? Were you ever shouted on when you were being loud and playful? If you answered yes to any of these questions, there's a high probability that you've experienced the small t trauma. And if you're thinking that this definition encompasses literally everybody, you're right. Dr. Gabor Mate, an expert on trauma, calls this kind of trauma a universal one. The next point I never really believed until I first hand experienced it, which is we carry unfathomable amounts of trauma in us. So there are things we know. For example, the tree in your garden has leaves which are green in color. But do you know how many leaves are on that tree? I doubt, and if you do, that's weird. But that is something that we know we don't know. We are aware that we don't know how many leaves are on it. And this is the most interesting one, which is there are things we don't know. And this is where things start to get freaky because I cannot really give an example of that. Let that sink in for a second. There's this one example I can give, but as soon as I give it, it goes into the first category. Did you know that the tree in your garden communicates and talks to other trees in the garden? They share nutrients, warnings, and information through fungi in the roots. This is called the wood wide web. So, this information was something that you probably didn't know, but you also weren't aware that you didn't know this. Does it make sense? And hence, it falls into the category of the things we don't know, we don't know. And the things in this category are so difficult to find, excavate, and resolve because they are so much out of our awareness. And such is also the case with trauma. I vividly remember this guy on YouTube who some 4 years ago I was watching, and he was telling his viewers that there are blocks in your body and muscles that you aren't even aware of. And I remember thinking to myself, what the fuck is he talking about? I don't really have any tightness or blocks in my body. But now I understand that he was talking about something that was in the third category, which was I did not know that I did not know about it. And now I laugh at my naivete. Trauma, especially the small t one, is so far suppressed and repressed away from our consciousness that we don't really know it's down there. But sadly, not knowing about its existence does not stop it from operating and influencing our lives. And as I started to gradually uncover it and process it, I could not have thought how much of it we have stuffed down there in our bodies. Which brings me to the next point. Emotions are not just in our minds. I've realized that we feel and experience emotions in our bodies. And the ones we do not let ourselves feel completely, we store as trauma in our minds and in our bodies. Which brings me to the definition of trauma. Trauma is not an event, but the psychological and emotional wound incurred because of the event, which continues to operate within us. So, if suppose I've met with an accident on my bike and I am now terrified and anxious of driving my bike because of fear of accident. The trauma is not the event of accident, but the fear of accident that remained in me. This trauma is not just wired in our brains, but also our minds and bodies, which is also the premise of the book, The Body Keeps the Score. One of the things I learned from the Dr. K's trauma guide was that we as children learn and observe from the people around us. And this observation and understanding gets ingrained in us so deeply, which is similar to that of our sense of gravity. A baby does not have a sense of gravity until it starts to learn walking. It has been lifted by people all its life. So when it starts to walk, it gets a sense of the pressure of gravity. And this analogy just hit me hard. Imagine you're walking somewhere and suddenly the gravity goes one sixth of what it is. How mind bending would that be? Similar is the case with trauma. And this statement by Dr. K makes sense to me now because I've gone through the processing and I've felt the pressure of gravity go one sixth of what it was. And this is one of the reasons why you're ingrained in your old habits and way of thinking, and why it is so difficult to resolve trauma and rewire our brains. All problems are emotional problems. This one would be a bit difficult to explain, but I'm convinced this is true. Buddha said that all suffering arises out of attachment, to which I'd like to add all suffering arises out of attachment to emotions. I've realized that everything we do, every problem we have, every desire we have, either moves us towards the emotion that we like to feel or takes us away from an emotion that we don't want to feel. So, for example, you desire money and you ask yourself, why do I want that? And you realize that is because you want to travel. You again ask yourself, why do you want that? And you realize it is because so that you can see beautiful places on this earth. And then again, you ask yourself, why do I want that? And you realize it is because you want to feel happy when you do that, which is the feeling. You can literally try this with anything, and you'll realize everything has an emotional payoff. And I'd be curious to know if there is something you've discovered that does not have an emotional payoff. So if you master your emotions, you literally master your life. Processing trauma is not getting rid of negative emotions, but about understanding them. I started this journey with a getting rid of mentality. I wanted to get rid of and resolve all my negative emotions. But as it turns out, that acted as a hindrance to my progress. We tend to categorize negative emotions as a defect, but I've realized that they are actually a feature and they have power in them. More on that later. And each and every emotion, especially the negative ones, serve a purpose. A beautiful metaphor Osho once mentioned was wanting to experience just the positive emotions is similar to wanting to just inhale without exhaling. Just as inhaling and exhaling are natural part of our breathing process, the whole spectrum of emotions, the positive and the negative, are a natural part of being a human. And no matter how hard we try to avoid them using things like drugs, porn, alcohol, whatever, we won't ever be successful in it because it is a feature that is not going anywhere. A wiser approach that I took was to gradually start to understand them and even accept them. And it surprises me how comfortable I've gotten with certain emotions which were downright painful and excruciating earlier. This is also the reason why I don't like the name letting go, because there is a probability that people might think, and that is what happened to me, that the process is about letting go of negative emotions. A better name, in my opinion, which embodies this process would be letting it be or even surrender, because you literally give up and stop fighting the negative emotions. Relaxing with the emotions is superior to relaxing the emotion. Recently, I was on a walk and I saw this quote by Buddha on a school wall. I took a picture of it because it resonated with me so much. It said, stop trying to calm the storm, calm yourself instead. The storm will pass. When I was operating from my getting rid of mindset and I sat for meditations, every time a strong emotional storm surfaced, I tried to calm the emotional storm by trying to relax it and wanting to let go of the emotions. But as I started to understand and accept these emotions, I started to relax with the storm. And what gradually started happening was that the storm started losing its emotional charge. This not just works while meditating, but also in our day-to-day lives. One of the examples I can think of is we think of anxiety as something that is hindering us or stops us. But when I was reading the book, The Upsides of Stress, the author cited the study in which participants who experience social anxiety disorder, which is a condition in which they are so anxious they usually don't go out and talk to anyone, when they were made to interpret anxiety as something that makes them excited and gets them ready for action, they were much more confident and charismatic. So I decided to give this a shot, and whenever I used to feel anxious doing something, I interpreted that as my body getting ready for action and me getting excited. And what happened because of that was in the short run, my performance improved, and in the long run, I started to get comfortable with the sensations and the experience of anxiety, which also led to the anxiety storm losing its charge gradually. A resolve to understand difficult emotions makes them less difficult. The first time I heard about this was from Sam Harris on Andrew Huberman's podcast. And he was saying that once we take a strong decision or a resolve to understand and just figure out this difficult or painful emotions, our resistance around them just dissolves completely. My experience says that the reason why our difficult emotions are difficult is because we resist feeling them, which is, of course, easier said than done. But when I took a decision to understand them and figure them out, although my resistance around them didn't completely resolve, it was reduced to a great extent, which made these painful emotions a lot less painful to experience. It gets worse before it gets better. I did go through this dark night of the soul when the process felt horrible, painful, and even hopeless. Because this reservoir of emotion is so full, when we start emptying it, shit comes full throttle. And the stuff surfaced which I never thought was buried inside me. And because I had heard of this dark night of the soul, and I knew that stuff gets worse before getting better, I kept persevering and things got much better. And although I do feel currently that I am at this equilibrium, there are times when strong emotions surface that demand a lot of my attention and time. In fact, I was going through one of such spells just yesterday. But now, what is different is I feel much more capable and confident of handling them. I say this often, but all progress in my life has been because I was consistent with this one technique. And now we get into the fun part, and I talk about the benefits I've experienced. I am much more in touch with my body. I was someone who was completely disassociated with my body. I was not aware of this realm of emotions and sensation, and I used to live up in my head. If someone were to come to me around 4 years ago and ask me, what does grief feel in your body? I would have answered, what the fuck do you mean? Later, I realized that this was a defense mechanism. Even Dr. Van talks about it in his book, in which he says when living in the body becomes painful and excruciating, as a coping mechanism, we start living in our heads. As I started releasing and processing this trauma and got comfortable with my bodily sensations, I just realized that there is this whole different way of experiencing the world, which was as if this new reality that was not available to me just opened. Also, this incessant shoving away of our emotions takes a toll on our body as it is taxing on our energy reserves. When that reduced for me, my general sense of well being and my vitality also improved. As I became more aware of the body and listened to its needs, I also got more intuitive. Not in the woo woo sense, but things like I understand when my body is satiated when I'm eating. I understand at what point, if I keep exerting my body, I'll probably fall sick. And I also understand when my body is not rested enough. The frequency and intensity of positive emotions has increased manyfold. The way I see emotions is like a pendulum. To the extent we pull the pendulum to one side, is the same extent the pendulum will go on the other side. So if we allow the pendulum to swing only halfway at the side of negative emotions, by physics, it will only go halfway at the positive emotion side as well. So to the degree we suppress our painful emotions, the enjoyable emotions also get suppressed by default. So ironically, as I As I started to let myself feel the negative emotions and process them, the magnitude, intensity, and frequency of my positive emotions just increased manifold. And I am a happier person in general. Increased empathy and social awareness. Do you ever see someone get kicked in the nuts and feel pain? That happens because of activation of mirror neurons in our brain, which help us feel what the other person is feeling. But the problem with me was, if suppose someone talking to me was experiencing grief, my mirror neurons would get fired, but the grief in me was so far suppressed that I couldn't feel it and relate to that person. And because emotions are a strong social glue, this affected how socially aware I was and how much I could connect with the person. Now that I've started to get comfortable with these emotions, my empathy muscles are stronger and I can understand what the person is feeling, which also makes us connect better. Increased motivation. I see motivation as an emotion. You say, I feel motivated. And I think so, it would be safe to categorize motivation as a positive emotion. So, going back to the pendulum metaphor, if we numb our negative emotions, our positive emotions, including motivation, get numb in the same magnitude, which is one of the reasons why you feel so unmotivated all the time. More than that, even negative emotions are amazing motivators. They have raw power in them. Have you ever noticed that the project you were procrastinating on for the entire week, you can stay all night up doing it when the submission was next day? It was because you were motivated by the fear of adverse outcome in case you didn't complete it. So as I started harnessing the power of negative emotions, my motivation just skyrocketed. Helped me find my purpose. I haven't really talked about this on this channel, but I am a lawyer. I've just completed my 5-year degree. But during my law school, as I kept processing these emotions, I was hit with the realization that although I love the law field, there is something that I love much more, and I'd rather commit my life to that pursuit. It was personal development and helping others develop themselves. And now I'm training to be a life coach. And I'm so happy and fulfilled that I work daily towards that goal. I guess what happened was that as I grew more self aware, I realized what was more authentic to my true self. And this beautiful process also gave me the courage to switch paths and make this choice. If there's one thing that helped me the most in this journey, it is having compassion towards myself. I've made a video on my journey of adopting a compassionate mindset. So if you also experience self hate, you can click here to watch.